lives. As an artist collaboration, we've given shape and depth to some of the most complicated topics of our time, making them easily accessible for those who seek to understand. We've given voice and space to the stories that often go ignored. Please take a moment to consider being a patron, make a donation, or join Rockfin. Thank you. Hello.
Hi, guys.
Once again, we're back with another Pullquote. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And we're excited to be back.
Yeah.
We're excited to have our next guest named Vanessa Beeley, who
I'm sure you all know who Vanessa Beeley is.
Yeah.
At least our followers have.
I would hope.
Idea.
Our followers do. I would hope a lot of our audience. I would like to do a shout out or make a shout out to the Rockfin audience. Because Vanessa is also on Rockfin, as we are, and we're streaming live to Rockfin right now. So hello, everybody on Rockfin.
Hello.
Vanessa Beeley is an independent journalist and photographer based in the Middle East, on the ground in Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and Palestine, while also covering the conflict in Yemen since 2015. In her own words, the majority of official media outlets in the West are agents for power. I aspire to be a humble agent for the people in a way that I can, and my most effective contribution is my voice and my words that transmit the voices of the disappeared and the unheard. You can find her work on her website, thewallwillfall.org. You can find her on Rockfin, as we mentioned, and on patreon.com. Welcome, Vanessa Beeley. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's great to meet you guys.
Yeah,
it's really good to meet you too.
Yeah,
we're so thrilled that you're here.
Yeah, we've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Yeah, we really have. We can just jump right into it.
Well, before we started, you were talking about a little bit about Damascus and life there, and that the electricity is off. Are you running on a generator or just the daylight of the day?
Daylight, but I did actually manage to install two very big batteries and I don't understand it all, but an inverter, which at least keeps my laptop, my phone, and the fridge running 24/7. So
is that using
after about a year of it's using battery power, but it can be connected to solar if, for example, the electricity cuts completely.
Right.
Which it does every now and then. I mean, it's intermittent, so we have 4 hours off at the moment, 2 hours on every day.
Okay.
So we get around 6 hours electricity total per day, and actually we're pretty good. The next suburb, they're lucky if they get an hour and a half a day. So just to give an indication. And here, the water tanks are stored on the roof. Mm-hmm. So if there's no electricity, there's no pump to push the water up onto the tanks in the roof. So no electricity, if it really hits a critical cutout, means no water for most of the people here. And now the temperatures are not so bad, but 2 weeks ago we were hitting like 48 degrees. So,
and that's
this is all part and parcel of U.S. occupation, regime change, war, and sanctions. It's the whole parcel.
Wow.
I think Americans have a lot to learn. I think we can learn a lot from what's happening in your part of the world. I think it's about time.
I mean, this is something I mentioned also just before we came on, that, what's happening to us now with the whole COVID-19 project, or gaslighting project, as I call it, is we are having the hybrid war waged against us, that is, the multi-spectrum war that has been waged against countries like Syria and Iraq and Libya and Venezuela and Yemen for literally decades.
Mm-hmm.
So this entire multi-spectrum war, which results, how it results in food insecurity, electricity shortages, water shortages, economic crashes, effectively sanctions on people, but just branded in a different way. So people are not actually waking up to the fact that the way wars have been waged against, if you like, the global south, or, to use other imperialist terms, the undeveloped world, are those methods, and that strategy is now being turned against us very clearly for me.
Yeah, and that's something that we've been saying on our own as well, quite often,
right.
in most things that we do, and it's what I've been telling people, in the United States. Often our audience, has a certain lifestyle, and that lifestyle was built on the shoulders of people in the global south. And what's been taking place in all the countries that you mentioned, I liked how you put it, the multi-spectrum war. Yeah, that's I want to go into that in a little bit. But basically that, what's been happening to those countries, like, as you said, for decades, is now coming here. And it's being done a little differently. Like we were talking about noise and things in our neighborhood. And you mentioned, oh, well, it could be that, Israel might just launch a bombing campaign and, this time of day. But, for a while.
A bit early for them, to be fair.
A bit early. Okay. They wait till the night. Well, we were we were being bombed through professional fireworks last year for about a month straight, every single night.
Than that,
yeah.
I would say.
Wow.
Really high grade professional fireworks.
And it was just
right outside our door. Like you could smell the sulfur in our house.
Wow.
That's how close they were.
And they were all over the community, and this, we were finding out that this was going on all over the United States, and it was going on last year. And we felt like it was a means of like a bombing campaign that did not destroy property, right?
Right.
But it was certainly something that frayed nerves and caused,
Yeah, there was a lot of anxiety that was developing in our neighborhood as a result of what I call these professional grade fireworks bombing campaigns.
Again, but that's a tactic. If you look at what Israel does, even when it's not bombing Gaza, very much like Eva Bartlett, I spent quite a lot of time in Gaza, particularly during the 2012 bombing. But even when they're not running a bombing campaign or a lengthy mowing of the lawn, as they call it,
wow.
They will still fly jets at very high speeds, breaking the sonic boom, which creates like an explosion as if they've just bombed. And actually, it's interesting you say that about the fireworks, because I can't remember when exactly, but in the UK, in the Northeast, I think they started doing that. The RAF started doing that. They started running exercises where they were creating this kind of sonic boom, which literally does sound as if you've just been bombed.
Wow.
Right. And that I remember it being reported shortly into the whole COVID project.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, all of this is about it's about destroying agency of what I call the little people. Mm-hmm. In Syria, the voices of the majority of the Syrian people that are against the regime change war have been completely disappeared. They've been censored, deplatformed, including, of course, journalists that are transmitting those voices. They've lost all agency in the West. They don't have a voice. They're not given a voice. The only voices that can be heard are those that are amplifying the narratives that serve UK and US coalition foreign policy agenda. And that's exactly what's happening with COVID. Doctors and scientists and epidemiologists and medical experts and analysts are being deplatformed, censored, sacked, silenced, defunded. It's exactly the same tactics that we saw over Syria. It's no different. And maybe that's why those who really stood on the right side of the barricades on Syria saw this coming immediately because the tactics were so similar.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
Right.
I agree. You mentioned the term multi-spectrum. Can we, for our audience, can you describe what that means?
Well, it basically means the deployment of tactics and strategies which are not necessarily military. So that will include political pressure. It will include economic pressure, which of course incorporates economic sanctions or economic terrorism, as I call it, because sanctions are never supposed to be unilateral. They are always supposed to only target specific individuals. But we know by looking at the Yemen, by looking at Syria, by looking at Iraq, the starvation of 500,000 children that were described as worth it by Madeleine Albright, of course. And here, very much the same thing. 90% of Syrians are now below poverty level. Starvation, food insecurity, food shortage, electricity shortages, water shortages, fuel shortages. All of these are part of the multi-spectrum war. And effectively what it is are methods designed to bring pressure upon a population to coerce it into complying with the agendas of the US and the UK and the entire sort of imperialist, capitalist, corporate cabal. Because I think what we're also seeing now is that governments themselves are largely instruments of power. What we're now seeing coming to the surface is this transnational corporatocracy or oligarchy that is effectively controlling everything. Mm-hmm. Nations, and we're starting to see the lack of divide between nations that we have traditionally presumed to be enemies. This is just my opinion. I don't know what you guys think about this, but I think Afghanistan is absolutely bringing it to the fore. You can see it very clearly.
Oh yeah. Well, this is certainly in line with what we often say and cover in our essays.
Right. I feel, I have a brother who serves, and he's said things like, sometimes you can go into these other countries and you can't tell the difference if you're in like Afghanistan or Arkansas. That's how much empire has taken over. They're all driving the same kind of cars. They have the same kind of fast food places. You know what I'm saying? And there's no culture. There's no culture maintained in these places.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also part of this multi-spectrum war. The intention, particularly when I look at Syria, but if you look across the Middle East, it's an intention to destroy civilization. It's an intention to destroy historical heritage sites and monuments. So it's a project to erase this entire civilization and to rebuild it, if you like, in the image of the imperialist cartel. Now, of course, I stretch that imperialist cabal cartel to the oligarchy, to the parasite class, because that's effectively what it is. Presidents are not elected, they're chosen. I would say the same in the UK. Leadership is not elected, it's chosen. It's put in place to implement part of the roadmap during their tenure, right? For me, there's no difference between the parties in the US, the parties in the UK. We don't have, and we shouldn't be looking at left and right anymore.
No.
That's an old paradigm that really we should be dropping completely. It's them against us.
Right, exactly.
And people here get it. That's the big difference. We're, in a sense, these so-called undeveloped countries like Syria that have been the target of dozens of interventions and interferences by the CIA since the CIA was created. This isn't the first time that Syria has been targeted. Since 1942 onwards, Syria has been the target of assassinations of military high command, leaderships, coup d'etat, intervention through intelligence operations, etc., leading to now. So this isn't a new thing. So this country is very prepared for this. It's the people are, if you speak to the road sweeper, if you speak to the taxi driver, if you speak to the receptionist in the hotel, they all know exactly what's going on. Right. The difference in the West, we're way behind the curve. We don't get it. So many of us just don't understand what is going on. We're still sleeping through this, sadly.
Well, we've been both insulated and propagandized to
our whole lives.
Yeah. I would say,
and the insulation is part of the propaganda, by the way.
Absolutely. Right.
One of the things that I really like about your coverage of Syria, and you go to the places that you cover, is that you also have an equal amount of passion for the social ties and the social construct, which is what you just talked about, where the road workers, they know what the hell is going on, and I think that the United States, social ties have broken apart, families have fallen apart, and we're especially witnessing this in the age of COVID, where I know my inbox is blowing up with friends and acquaintances that have lost all of their friends and all of their family members because they've chosen to maintain, body autonomy, and they finally have sort of woken up to what's going on globally. What can we learn from these people that you live around that have these strong social ties? How do we get there?
I look at it, I mean, you're absolutely right. And we're back to the kind of the multi-spectrum war, because of course a big part of it is, as you mentioned, propaganda. The media, of course, is the vanguard of the propaganda cartel, but also UN agencies, NGOs, non-governmental organizations that generally are funded by governments to carry out the instructions of that government, either on the territory of target nations or outside, but still having an influence on events in the country. And that's been made very, very clear inside Syria. And of course, what they do in countries like Syria, they try to divide along sectarian lines. So they try to divide Christian against Sunni Muslim against Shia Muslim, Yazidi again, so Syria is such a very like America in a way, but I mean it's such a hodgepodge of different faiths, different sects, different religious branches of whether it's Islam or Christianity or Jews or Yazidi or Ismaili. They all, prior to 2011, coexisted peacefully inside Syria. I mean, Syria, Damascus has been inhabited for 10,000 years.
Yeah.
This is not some kind of, as the US media would love to portray it, it's not some kind of backward nation full of savages, and that's very much the image that Western media and Western agencies like to kind of portray. If they're not doing it in a passive aggressive way, they're doing it in a way like, we need to help these developed countries. We need to send in our NGOs. We need to completely occupy them with so-called humanitarian complex, the not-for-profit industrial complex, etc.
Right.
Cory Morningstar is fantastic on this. If you have anyone on to discuss this, it should be. Well,
we've actually been working on that.
We're trying to get her.
Cool. She's absolutely, I love her to pieces. She was actually my mentor over the White Helmets, which
really?
Wow.
She loves to call me her protege over that, and it's true. I leaned on her very heavily to figure out what on earth was going on with the White Helmets, and she was the first to write about them in 2014, actually. Wow. So she was well ahead of the curve on that one.
She is in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And, it's funny. it's funny. She's on an audio program called Aesthetic Resistance. John Stepling. So we've had John Stepling, and we've had
Haruki
Hamada. So we need Corey.
We need Corey.
And there's a couple other guests on that show we want to bring on.
She can be quite elusive, but she's well worth getting on board. But coming back to your question about what can we learn in the West, here there is still a very strong religious base, or a spiritual base, as I prefer to call it, actually. There's still a very strong, whatever faith you're talking about here, there is still a very fundamental belief in destiny, in a greater power, in there being something, a better life to work towards. They still have this faith that binds them together, whatever religion, faith they come from. And every Syrian will say to you, if you ask them, and they don't really like these kind of questions, are you Christian, are you Muslim? They'll always say to you, we're Syrian first, and our faith is secondary to being Syrian. And this is, but also the second thing, which you pointed out, we've lost in the West, not only in America, but in Europe and in UK. But I think it's also connected to this letting go of spirituality. Yeah. We've lost that family unit.
Right.
Here, the reason that people are not seen on the streets starving is because however bad their situation, a member of the family will be taking care of them. Or if not a member of the family, their neighbor.
Right.
Or their neighbor from the second floor up. Or nobody is really left in a bad situation here. It's a sort of innate reflex that people will come to the help of someone that is fallen on hard times or is suffering. So whether it's family or whether it's the extended Syrian family, because that's effectively how people see it here. You don't see for example, you don't see the number of homeless on the streets of Damascus that you will see in New York or in Paris or in London, for sure. Despite everything, despite a 10-year war, despite sanctions, despite starvation, despite no fuel, no work, etc. You won't see hundreds of homeless sleeping on the streets like you will in the West.
From what I understand, the late 18th century, early 19th century. I'm sorry, late 19th century, early 20th century in the United States in the working class sectors, society was more like what you're describing, where there was more of a social aspect. People had stronger ties, and their feelings about the wealthy oligarchs was that they did not like them. They did not aspire to be them, like you feel like today is, and so it feels like that's all been drained out of Western culture, the idea of strong social ties, and it's taken a while to do it. But one thing I want to point out that comes to me as you're speaking, we live in a very mixed neighborhood, very working class, very poor. But Julie, you've made a point of talking to not only our Black neighbors, like people who live near us, but also people around just randomly at bus stops and things like that. And it seems to me that we
don't have a car, so we just take the bus everywhere.
Right, exactly. So I'm going to let you speak to it, but I want to point out two things. And one is that most of these people don't buy into it,
right?
And that she speaks to. And the other thing that we've noticed is no matter how poor and how whatever the situation is, they stick together much more than some of the white neighbors, who tend to disperse more. Although in this neighborhood alone, we've moved into a very strange place, because where we used to live, there was none of this. San Francisco is not nowhere near. It's exactly the opposite of what you're describing, right? Nobody knows each other, right?
Yeah. Like London.
but
Everybody's like this.
yeah, everybody's
Yeah.
But,
like London, exactly.
And like you can live in the same apartment building and not know your neighbor,
right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But here, like, everybody knows everybody, and the people who've lived in this neighborhood, some of them have lived here for generations, to the point to where it's like, you know, their family's been here 100 years,
right?
You know. But to speak to what what you've been discovering.
Well, I see it on both ends, and I don't know if this relates to where you live in Damascus, but I see generational anxiety, generational poverty, generational abuse, but I also see strong social ties. I see both of it equally, which is why, and of course, I don't know if you've heard the rumor. I don't know if this is anecdotal or true, but regarding the COVID sanctions or the COVID mandates that are being placed across the United States, the more so-called free areas are like Republican, and then the more oppressed areas are like Democrat. Well, where we currently live is a more liberal Democrat minded. So a lot of people, because of this generational oppression that they've learned to live with, they just immediately capitulated. They didn't even question. They didn't stand up for themselves. But at the same time, while they're doing that, they're like working together, like our neighbor across the street who, allowed her school district that she works for to impose a medical intervention on her and possibly risk her health, just gave us 25 ears of corn. So you know what I'm saying? Like, there's this real
because
strong,
we helped them out.
Yeah, because there's this real strong social tie, but then there's this complete capitulation to oppression and narratives and coercion.
Well, actually, I mean, it's the kind of, for me, I termed it a couple of days ago on Twitter. It's kind of like, for me, like a colonized mind. They've basically been completely taken over.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're literally now they're willing slaves to the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I say this even to some degree, members of my own family, have completely bought into the system. It's the belief that the system is there to take care of you, that the government is there to take care of you, that pharmaceutical companies have your health as their number one priority, not profit. And it's I don't know. There was a really interesting, I think it was on BitChute, it was a British hypnotist who had done this really kind of amateur report on how he looked at the COVID-19 measures, like the social distancing, the masking, and he compared it to his preparation for putting people into hypnosis.
I think we watched
the distancing, the masking, and so on. It was really like a light bulb moment for me. I'd already considered that the only way that people could be buying into this is if they were literally in some way hypnotized or gaslighted into succumbing to serfdom, basically, because that's the bottom line. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And when he described the processes and basically exactly what he does prior to putting people under hypnosis, and determining who is the most suggestible in his audience, etc. It's precisely what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's exactly. It feels like it.
And we have heard that. Plus another one in LA did a similar thing.
But I did want to speak to what JP. What I did want to speak just very briefly to what JP talked about earlier. There's a large contingent of people in our neighborhood, and just anecdotally or just by talking to people, they just happen to be Black who are just like, no, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm not falling for any of this. And when I ask them, how do you feel about a mask? He's like, are you kidding? A lot of these people, are you kidding? And they're all sitting in groups playing, chess on, public checkerboards, or hanging out, doing whatever. And I'm like, what do you guys think about all this? And they're like, we don't need anybody to tell us what to do. So there is that there, which goes along the lines of the statistic that you keep hearing over and over again in the media, which is that a large percentage of the Black population in the United States is not capitulating to any of this.
Right. And at the same time, there may be people, very working class around here. And this area has been deeply affected by NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement that came about, 30 years ago. And deeply affected. And, so we have a couple of generations that have come about since then. And what you see is just sort of a beaten down look to the people. And even if they don't agree about, they don't think that they should be wearing a mask, they capitulate, they get on the bus because they have to get on the bus to go to work. And they, and the bus is making you put it on before you get on. Yeah. And, so these people are like security guards, and,
they're just trying to earn an income.
Trying to earn an income, the kind of work that you cannot do remotely. Right. And so these are the people, and what we've noticed around, watching pop culture, or like even the Olympics, is that the servant class are now, the working class, the people who are the servants are the ones that are masked up, while the ruling class and the managerial class or whatever are not. And so the professional classes are allowed to work at home, and the other people are not, and so they have to interface with the public and be subjugated through this slave training.
It's slave training
via the mask.
Yeah. And I doubt. Do you see that in Damascus? Do you see a lot of people, like the working class, wearing masks or anything like that? Or
no, I mean, actually, I'm trying to think back to early last year. We had a curfew, which started at, I think it was 6 or 7 p.m. and it finished at 6 or 7 a.m. That lasted about a month, and then the president said, actually, the curfew is having a disastrous effect on the economy, which is far greater than the adverse effect of the virus. So he lifted the curfew, and we've actually never gone back. I mean, here, if, for example, I enter a shop and I'm not wearing a mask and there's a lady wearing a mask, nobody cares. I mean, no one will have a go at me because I'm not wearing it.
Right.
And actually, I'm trying to think if I've ever been asked to wear one. When I entered actually one of the military buildings, because the soldiers are supposed to wear them. They don't. They're supposed to wear them on the checkpoints. Not the majority of them don't. I think on the odd occasions that one of the commanding officers comes around, you see them all wearing it, and then like 2 days later they will pull them down. I went to enter one of the kind of administrative buildings, and the soldier at the door basically said, can you wear a mask? And I said, no, I'm sorry. I said, I don't wear a mask. And he just kind of looked at me and said, okay, go in. Anyway, and as soon as you enter the building, no one's wearing masks.
Right. Right. Wow.
It's, but this is kind of, I don't know if you saw the footage of the last Israeli attack and the massive party in the middle of Damascus that was going on while the missiles were being shot down above the venue. This is Syria. Like, people here have a lot more to worry about than COVID, to be honest. They when you're talking 90% of the population is really below poverty levels. So they're at the levels that you're talking about where you live and beyond.
Yes.
To give an idea to your audience, an average government employee is earning 70,000 Syrian pounds, which is around $20 per month. And to give you an idea, chicken now, for 2 kilos of chicken, you're talking 20,000 Syrian pounds. So that's a third of their salary potentially gone on just 2 kilos of chicken for their family, right? Just to put things in perspective here. Am I freezing?
No.
I just saw a little blip, but nothing.
Oh, okay.
You're fine. Yeah,
Seems to be fine.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, this. So people here really have a lot more to worry about than COVID.
Yeah.
And really the numbers here are okay. Again, it's being hyped up, and it's being hyped up also externally, of course. It's being hyped up by groups like the White Helmets and Idlib that are receiving. Now their funding is for the manufacture of PPE. They've kind of switched from, whatever else they were doing, demining or whatever. Now the funding is for them to make PPE. And Idlib, it's a joke. It really is. Sorry, people, it really is a joke. Any funding that is coming into northwest Syria is going straight to Al-Qaeda, bottom line. And White Helmets are Al-Qaeda's auxiliary. So any funding that's coming in under any kind of pretext to the White Helmets is effectively going straight to a designated terrorist group, which is ironic as we're coming up to the 20th anniversary of 9/11.
Right.
And Al-Qaeda is the bête noire in the West. Of course, we know the story behind that, but
yeah.
So that's a good segue, because we have about 20 minutes left. That's a good segue to talk about the latest. I know the UK column brought it up.
On Monday's show.
On Monday's show, and so you want to explain to what's going on, this exposure that things are not. Anyway.
Oh, the BBC.
The Mayday. Just to give our audience a context, a BBC documentary called Mayday, and then the bomb on the bed, or whatever it was called, was released last year, and a reporter or a person like us, what is his name? I mentioned it to you in our email. I didn't write it down. He basically took the BBC to task and said,
Peter Hitchens.
Peter Hitchens. Yeah. Right.
Oh, right.
Peter Hitchens.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
He took them to task and said, these are lies, and and so the BBC, the UK column was talking about this a little bit. Your name came up, so that's just a quick context for our audience. But you want to talk about it a little bit?
I'll try and condense it. Of course, this is all based around. If we look at the pretext for the war against Iraq, it was the weapons of mass destruction. We know that entire dodgy dossier fell apart completely. There were no weapons of mass destruction. We have the history also of the Benghazi rape in Libya. We have the incubator babies, etc., etc. So we have a history of lies that have enabled or manufactured consent for military intervention, either direct or by proxy, as has been the case in Syria. So for me, the chemical weapons narrative is the weapons of mass destruction version in Syria. It's the Syria version.
The barrel bombs and
And if we look at the first heavyweight chemical attack that happened in 2013 in Eastern Ghouta. Now, to put that into context, 6 months prior to that, there had actually been a chemical weapon attack carried out by the terrorist groups against the Syrian Arab Army and civilians in Khan al-Assal, north of Aleppo. When the UN finally sort of got off its backside 6 months later to come and investigate that chemical attack, literally before they even got off the tarmac at Damascus airport, lo and behold, a chemical attack happened that was deemed to be carried out by the Syrian government against civilians in Eastern Ghouta that was then occupied by Western-backed terrorist groups. Right, so fast forward to April 2018, when Eastern Ghouta, so the same area, eastern suburbs of Damascus, were in the final throes of liberation by the Syrian Arab Army. Douma was the final district that was still under control of the armed groups, namely Jaish al-Islam, one of the most brutal and violent armed groups in the conflict. In 2013, they burned civilians alive in the bread furnaces in Adra, an industrial area to the north of Damascus. Thousands of prisoners were decapitated, tortured, executed, all of them, or the majority of them, Shia Muslim or Alawite. So this was a sectarian ethnic cleansing program by this group, Jaish al-Islam, that then took thousands of those same civilians from Adra to Douma and held them in underground jail in Douma called Tauba jail, where thousands of civilians were held and tortured and experimented on and used for staging false flag events, etc. in this area. This is all coming from survivor testimony. I'm not just kind of concocting this whole story. This has come from years of both myself and Eva Bartlett and Sharmeen Narwani being in Syria and talking to survivors of these areas that were occupied by these armed groups. So in the closing stages of the Syrian Arab Army liberation, and there were negotiations going on with Jaish al-Islam to release those kidnappees, those kidnapped civilians that had been there for 5 years. Suddenly, we get a chemical attack. And I was in Damascus when this happened. A few days prior to this attack, I'd been with Frederick Pleitgen of CNN, and together we'd actually visited chemical weapon facilities and munitions stores and missile factories, all belonging to the armed groups. Of course, he never mentioned that in his Douma report after the chemical attack was announced. Almost immediately, I and a number of other, I would say, very distinguished and clearly very honest journalists like Robert Fisk, like there was a German reporter from ZDF, and I can't remember his name, I apologize. We all entered Douma and drew the conclusion that there had been no chemical attack. Civilians were back on the street. Bear in mind, at this point, they were claiming sarin. But at this point, the civilians were back on the street in the area. The hospital was functioning again. Medical staff were telling me immediately, we don't know what was going on. Like, people were coming in with smoke inhalation, and suddenly the white helmets burst on the scene and started hosing boys down and started screaming chemical attack. And we're like, what? There's no chemicals. Like, they're just suffering with breathing in smoke, which is normal in a war zone, in under attack, and when they're being forced to go into basements usually.
Sure.
So this was kind of my first experience of this alleged chemical attack. So we immediately, I think I did an interview with UK Column, and I immediately said it's not a chemical attack. And then, of course, fast forward again, the Russians took a load of witnesses to The Hague. They were all dismissed as Russian agents.
Right.
And their testimony, even from the boy that was in the famous hospital scene being hosed down, Hassan Diab, he was taken to The Hague, right? So all of this was dismissed. Okay. We then know that, and again, I was still in Damascus when US, UK, and France bombed Damascus before the OPCW inspectors had even been able to go in and finish their report and finish their investigation. US, UK, and France bombed Damascus. Luckily, God bless the Syrian Arab Army, air defenses, they brought down the majority of the missiles, but they still managed to hit quite close to me here, Barzeh, which is actually now a facility for investigating cures for snake venom. But they claim this was a chemical weapons production facility, so it should be destroyed. And then, of course, fast forward to the Courage Foundation panel, which gave a platform to inspectors who had been part of the original investigation team that came to Douma, and whose findings contradicted the final report from the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. And effectively, I'm very much condensing this, but people can go to Courage Foundation and WikiLeaks. They can follow our work on the OPCW on Twitter, etc., and they can fill in the gaps themselves. So effectively, these inspectors came forward to say that the OPCW had been compromised, it had been corrupted. The final report had been doctored to retrospectively justify the unlawful aggression by the UK, France, and the UK. Sorry, and the US. And then basically the BBC at this point decided to make this program, the Mayday series, to attempt to discredit the OPCW inspectors. Me, largely. A lot of the episodes were very much focused on discrediting me as much as they could, because remember also this came after the death of James Le Mesurier, the former British military intelligence founder of the White Helmet group.
Oh, Le Mesurier. Okay, yeah, I remember that. Okay.
So, and this entire BBC smear, I mean, it was extraordinary. I think it was 15 hours of tripe. I mean, I can't describe it any other way. I mean, Chloe Hadjimathieu, I've had about 4 years of these kind of attacks from the Times, from CNN, from Vice, from Huffington Post, from the Guardian. I'm up to here with them. But this one was really one of the most appallingly badly researched. One of her researchers, actually, Abd al-Qadir Habak, was someone that had been trained by a UK Foreign Office outreach agent as a cameraman to produce the footage that the BBC and Channel 4 and CNN wanted to demonize and criminalize the Syrian government. And he had been filmed alongside the child beheaders of Abdullah Isa in August 2016, making a video for Channel 4. Now, Channel 4 picked up on the fact that the guy in the footage was the actual beheader of the child. So Channel 4 pulled the report. Yeah. But Habak was seen filming them. So he was clearly on very good terms with violent extremist groups. He was then used so he was British trained, British Foreign Office trained by default by kind of one of their outreach agents, contractors. And he had clearly been working with the extremist armed groups that were responsible for war crimes and committing atrocities against Syrian civilians. And yet the BBC deemed it okay to use this guy as one of their main researchers for the Mayday series. And when I actually wrote to them to complain, they wrote back saying, yeah, but loads of other media companies have used him. I mean, literally that was their response.
Oh my God.
Right. So, what Peter Hitchens managed to push through is a retraction, basically, from the BBC. They tried to smear one of the inspectors by saying he'd been paid a very large reward by WikiLeaks for coming forward. That was totally, I mean, absolute slander, libelous. It was a lie, effectively. And then there was another, they tried to infer that this inspector had said the entire scene was staged, and he seemed to be keen to not. The inspectors are not political, so they stick very much to their facts, to their science, to their investigation. They don't want to be kind of put in a bracket that they feel they don't fit into. So that's fair enough. And it was wrong of the BBC to present or to try to frame this particular inspector in this way. It's criminal, actually.
Right.
Because this guy is already putting his neck on the line by coming forward.
Right.
Right. I mean, this is not, the OPCW is not some minor company.
Right.
It's the global body for the control of chemical weapons. So, so this whistleblower, they don't like to be called that, but this expert was putting his neck on the line, and the BBC was endangering him.
Right.
I mean, after the Mayday series, Chloe published another article in which she actually published the photograph of my car that I use here in Damascus with the number plate showing.
Wow.
That's doxing me.
That's basically doxing you. Yeah.
That's
So the entire BBC report was not about journalism. It was about discrediting those who were challenging the UK Foreign Office policy in Syria. That's all it was about. It was not journalism. This is not journalism, as I put on my tweet lately, you know. Yeah. And Chloe was just another in a long line of instruments of power.
Right.
I mean, she was being fed. I had quite a few conversations with her. She didn't know what she was talking about. She hasn't got a clue about Syria, but she was being fed the responses to me. She was being fed the questions to me. And she was out of her depth, but, you know, probably they probably incentivized her. They probably told her, you know, get this right, and we'll have a nice job with you, with the BBC for X number of years, etc., or even MI6. But, you know, this is only the tip of the iceberg, to be honest. There's a whole lot of other falsehoods and misrepresentations, and you know, they won't address it. I've put in official complaints, but of course, Peter Hitchens has greater clout than I do, so good on him for pushing forward with this, and he's not a voice they can ignore.
Right.
But it shows, as I said, it's only the tip of the iceberg. There's an awful lot of other material within that report that is seriously dodgy. And the BBC, you know, their role in Syria, if you go back to 2013 and Robert Stewart's forensic report into BBC Panorama's Saving Syria's Children, where he concluded that it was a staged event by the BBC. And the fact that the UK Foreign Office documents that have been recently leaked show that the BBC was using these outreach agents to provide witnesses and footage and interviews to corroborate their storyline. In other words, the storyline that criminalizes the Syrian government.
Yeah.
Wow,
and
that's a lot of information. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm glad you were able to do that, because I don't think I barely was able to cover it in just like a 2-second. But you're immersed in it. You're immersed in it.
You're a part of it.
And it's about you as well. You know, that I didn't realize the extent of the smear campaign against you in this series. I mean, you know, they mentioned it, like I said, on the UK column, but I had no idea the extent of it. That's just remarkable.
There's one whole episode on me, but I think I'm mentioned in almost every episode.
Wow.
Not that I want to be, but you know,
right? Yeah, yeah.
It was extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah. The hits just keep coming, but you know, in media, there's no such thing as bad press, right?
No, and to be honest, they didn't seem to learn that the more they tried to attack the voices that were challenging their narratives, the more publicity they gave us, and the more people actually they changed public consensus for us. We did the work, but actually their attacks, in my opinion, changed public consensus in favor of Syria and against UK Foreign Office policy. So for that, thank you, BBC. You did a great job.
Very well. Very good.
Yeah, the corporate backfire, right?
Right. Which happens a lot.
Yeah.
You know.
You know, but this whole thing, you know, I just want to mention to people, this whole thing with the white helmets, you know, Vanessa, you were part of the, you know, you basically, I don't know if you single-handedly exposed them or if you were part of a group of people, but you know, if you've seen the Netflix show that won an Academy Award, you got a lie handed to you.
Oh yeah.
On a big plate.
Yeah.
You know, I never watched it, but I knew that it was a lie, right? You know, before it came out, because we were paying attention to you.
Right. All the way back then, we were just starting to get, you know, learn who you were. We didn't know, you know, much, but now we know more. This has really come full circle for us as far as being aware of what's going on globally, especially in Syria.
Syria is, you know, when you look at what's happening or has been happening in Syria for 10 years, it's a really good study for people wanting to understand what's happening to us now. I highly recommend people kind of dipping into, you know, whether it's my work, Eva Bartlett, Sharmin Nawani, Stephen Gowan's, his book, Washington's Long War on Syria is a must read because it's not long. It's very scholarly, but it's very in depth, and it will give you sorry, the dogs are just waking up. It will give a really good insight into what's actually happening on the COVID front in the West right now,
Right.
and globally, not only in the West. You know, all populations are under attack now in one way, shape, or form.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's Julie likes to call it the Karunka Bunka, you know, because it's because it's all bunk, right? It's all just it's horrible. I, you know, we right from the beginning have been saying it's a marketing campaign. It's a marketing campaign because we come out of that world and we, you know, I do a lot of you know, in our platform I do a lot of you know, media, what would you call it? Just kind of breaking down, you know, what's happening with, you know, when you see an ad or you see a meme or a photograph or anything like that, and just kind of taking it apart and talking about how this is true propaganda aimed at you, and it can be very subtle and it can be very overt,
right?
But it's happening, and people don't get that, and they don't get that their government is actually doing something to them, as well as the, you know, the corporations and
the corporations,
you know,
right.
especially
well,
the corporations.
The British government has, I think it's a 23 million marketing budget for COVID going into 2023. So that gives you some indication of the fact that, hang on, if they need to market this,
right?
What the hell?
Right.
You know, if this is a real global pandemic, you wouldn't need to market it.
Right.
People would automatically take the measures they need to protect themselves.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. We don't need a government to tell us how to take care of our health. We're pretty clever like that. You know.
Well, for some reason we've survived, you know,
all these years.
You know, human race has survived so long without these interventions. I just don't know what we would have done without the COVID shot.
Yeah.
Well, you know, again, it's a bit like all of these humanitarian interventions into countries like Syria and Yemen. They never ever are productive or positive.
No.
Right? Because they're not designed to be. And I think you have to look at that analogy also. That's also an intervention under the banner of humanitarian or development, bringing democracy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So ostensibly to bring something positive to that country.
Well, and we talk about that.
You know, let's look at all of those countries. They're all destroyed.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah, and it's aimed at, you know, like you said, you know, multi-spectrum. Here, you know, we talk about in some of our videos, you know, wraparound services that come through, you know, third sector nonprofits and NGOs, and how they're designed to keep people in the system, right? It's designed to keep people poor,
right?
And you know, and this is all done through a variety of means, but they identify people, keep them, you know, out of work, and keep them in a position where they continually over generations have to stay within that system, so that everybody makes money except the people who are being helped.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
we're seeing that.
There was a really good article I read just before I came on up at Pandata. which is talking about exactly this. It's basically saying, because of COVID, all of these third world countries are being completely neglected on every other level except COVID. So suicide rates are climbing, poverty levels are climbing, starvation levels are climbing. All of these other health and economic disasters are increasing because COVID is being used to suppress countermeasures to those issues.
Yep.
Right. So actually, COVID is being weaponized to deepen poverty, to deepen economic instability, to deepen health issues,
Right.
to deepen depression, suicide, drug abuse, child abuse, etc.
Right.
And I think we all said that from very early on.
Yeah,
This
absolutely.
will be the fallout from lockdown and from these draconian measures is going to be way greater and way more devastating than a pandemic that has a survival rate of 99.6% or 0.5%, depending on what stats you look at.
Just all those bodies piling up in the street. I just can't believe it,
The funeral pyres in India that have been going on for centuries.
or the in China with the people just suddenly just dropping dead.
I actually have an Iranian friend who said, I think it was on an interview fairly recently, and he said, he's not necessarily on the same page with us on the whole COVID thing, but he said all these stories about people dropping down dead in the street were not true. They were fake.
Yeah. It's
right.
pretty funny. Well,
Yeah.
To wrap up, I want to show the audience your website, because there's some relevant stories to what we're talking about right now. So let me see here. Share your screen. It's the middle one. Okay, that's an odd one.
Hit. Oh, okay. Hit.
Okay. So,
there you go. Sorry.
Yeah.
Every time we turn around, this program or this platform has a new
twist to it. Yeah.
Okay.
They changed their.
Are we on Rockfin or no? We're on.
We're on your Twitter. Okay, let me find the other one.
No, there's the wall will fall. Just scroll down.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. There we go.
There we go.
Okay. We were just scrolled up.
So I was reading through
Okay, there we go. Okay, so one of the things that I thought was interesting was this story, Jabs for Kids, 18 Reasons Why I Won't Be Getting a Shot, and the doctors. Oh, this is the one that I thought was really important, though, was the lost generation, the abuse and exploitation of Syrian refugee children in Turkey.
Yeah.
So, but all those.
I highly recommend that interview, because I actually spoke to a member of the opposition in Turkey, and she's working, again, she's accused of being right-wing because she's addressing the refugee problem in Turkey from a Turkish perspective. But it's a very harrowing interview, but I don't think anything can describe better the nuclear after effect of these imperialist wars, whether it's against us through COVID-19 lockdowns, or whether it's through direct or proxy military intervention in a sovereign nation. This interview for me was it was a very difficult one to do. I really struggled not to kind of express rage when I was listening to what is going on. So this, it's very much a vision of the future, not only describing what is happening to refugees from Syria, displaced, of course, by the regime change war, but also the potential future for us in the West if we continue accepting the measures that are being forced upon us.
Wow.
Heavy.
So as they say on the column, we'll leave it there. But
we'll leave it there.
I'd like to remind our audience, this is the website is thewallwillfall.org, and you can find all these stories on that, and you can find out more about Vanessa on this website, as well as on her Patreon page, which you can also find us on Patreon and on Rockfin, so you can find us both there on Rockfin. And just to remind everybody, if you subscribe to Rockfin, for, I think it's $9.99 a month, you can get the premium content for all content creators. And so that's a real deal, and it helps us out too.
Yes.
Well, Vanessa, it's been great.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better word. Great is kind of lame, but we
actually recently I've been really struggling finding words. You're always brilliant at it, but oh God, I don't know.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
But we really enjoyed our time with you, and we were glad that the dogs didn't react to the students getting out of school.
I've been actually kind of suppressing them a little bit.
You're like, calm down.
Just wait.
But one thing I do want to say before we wrap up is I've really appreciated seeing the footage that you've been sharing online of Damascus and the areas that you live, because it kind of gives us a more personal and home.
It's pretty.
Yeah, and it's pretty there. Yeah, it really is.
Beautiful place, actually. Tomorrow I'm going to go to a really amazing place. So I'll be posting some videos from one of the highest points above Damascus. So hopefully I'll get some really good shots.
That's good. That sounds great.
So
We're
I'll
looking
be
forward
posting
to
that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, we're going to put you in the green room, and we're going to wrap up here, and we'll talk to you in just a moment.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. All right. Well,
we hope you guys enjoyed that conversation with Vanessa Beeley.
Yeah.
This will be up for a while, so go back and listen to it from the beginning. We have to move along.
Yeah.
We've got to get going, but please follow us on Rockfin. You can follow us on Twitter, Book of Hours Julie, Book of Hours JP. We also have an art and community page on Facebook that's still plugging away. So you can follow us at Book of Hours on Facebook as well.
That's right. And for all things, you can go to book-of-hours.com. You can also find us on Linktree. So that's linktree.com/Book of Hours, whatever it is.
Right.
And however that works.
And we're working on a Telegram page. We want to make it great. So it's going to take a minute for us to figure out how to design that. We're media, so
we tried it and it didn't work, so we'll try it again.
We'll try it again.
Anyway, well, we're glad you were able to join us, and thank you once again for another edition of Pullquote, and we'll talk to you again soon.
We will see you soon.
All right.
Bye guys. Thank you.
Book of Hours are artists here to empower and embolden your response to the constant negative sound bites that attack your news and social media feeds. In order to continue making the video essays and art you've come to enjoy, we need your support. Make a one-time donation or become a patron. Thank you.